Okay, good. Well, why don't we start then? Everyone, welcome to the inaugural lecture for the 2025-2026 season of talks for the Grand River chapter. My name's Chris Watts. I'm the vice president of the chapter. Um, oh, sorry. Um, Sorry, that's a Google device in the background. And it's a pleasure tonight to welcome Dr. Justin Jennings from the Royal Ontario Museum. Just before I introduce Dr. Jennings, I did want to offer our land acknowledgement. So the Grand River chapter acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our chapter is situated on the Haldeman Tract. That's the land granted to Six Nations that includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. And as a society, um, our active work, like as the OAS, in the OAS Society, our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our various chapters through research, teaching, learning, and community building, and is centralized within our main office in Toronto. So with that, I'll introduce our speaker for this evening. So as I mentioned, we have with us Dr. Justin Jennings from the Royal Ontario Museum. Dr. Jennings is the section head of anthropology there and the senior curator of the Archaeology and Ethnology of the Americas division within the Department of Art and Culture. He is also an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto, and he joined the museum and the university in 2006. Previously, he was a research associate at the Kotson Institute at UCLA and a lecturer at UC Santa Barbara, where he received his PhD in 2002. Dr. Jennings is the author of, by my count anyways, 4 books, sole-authored monographs on a variety of themes, including globalization, urbanism, sociality, and global governance. He's also edited 6 other books and completed 3 site monographs. His list of journal articles and book chapters is lengthy and equally impressive in scope, far too lengthy to talk too much about here in these remarks. And as curator at the museum, he's organized at least 12 major exhibits, including 2 on the Maya, one of which I was tangentially involved with. I wouldn't say I contributed very much, but I had a postdoc at the ROM, and Justin was nominally my handler when I was there between 2009 and 2012. And I can remember Justin working tirelessly on one of these exhibits for the Maya. And Dr. Jennings also has an impressive record of research funding and has maintained an active program of work in Peru focused on the Middle Horizon Wari culture, which we'll be hearing about tonight. And the title of his lecture is Afterglow, Beer, Psychedelics, and Good Vibes in Ancient Andean Geopolitics. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Jennings.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining me on a Tuesday night. It's a great honor here to be with the OAS chapter. So yeah, as Chris said, that I work primarily in the Andes here. We actually have a psychedelic exhibit that's going to be opening up next summer in June. So in some ways, it's also a preamble to those folks who can make it out to Toronto for that exhibit. It should be a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll learn a few things. But yeah, so this is going to be about the Wari. I'm going to keep this fairly short and hopefully fairly light. This is a very important topic, I think, and has some resonance. But nonetheless, I want to leave lots of room for any questions that folks might have. Just want to make sure. Let me see. Did you see the next slide there? Is it working or
I can
no?
just see the main.
Or screen sharing is paused. See, that's what I'm confused
Okay.
about. It says that. I'm not sure what that means. Here, let me see this. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to reshare because it had a button there that I've never seen before in my life. Share. It says I'm screen sharing now. So
Yeah.
you see the second thing, that's a pretty boring thing right here. But what I'm going to say, this is hot off the presses. So what I'm going to give you is a little bit of a summary of this article that's coming out at the end of the month. We've been trying to get a little bit of buzz from the media about this. So they said it's a sort of first run for those folks. And I know it's probably fairly different from what some of the talks that you heard previously. I just want to acknowledge here, you'll see that the first author here is Jacob um, Jacob Kerr. Here's Jacob right here. He's undergrad. Well, he this was we worked together on a senior honors thesis at UCLA. So he sent me this picture. I'm not sure why he sent me this picture. I said send a picture. He sent me the picture, from his graduation. He just graduated this year. Is going into a program in social work on psychedelics. And so this comes very much from us working together on this project. So I want to acknowledge Jacob and his work here and this paper coming out. Okay, so here's what I'm going to try to do today, is going to set up this argument. I'll talk a little bit about Wari as an early empire in the Andes, and then really try to underline this sort of common imperial problem. You get that from the Romans or whatever sort of expanding state. Is at some point you have to move from that conquest to consolidation. Somehow you have to create an infrastructure from what used to be just, say, warfare, other kinds of expansion. And in this case, and I'll go into it a little bit more, of course, their problem was attenuated because they had a political system that was very based on very familial connections. It was very person to person, face to face interactions. So because of that, they really had an issue of trying to consolidate and have these very close relations. And what I'm going to suggest here is that part of their solution were feasts, and those feasts were oftentimes paired with psychedelic beer. And those shared experiences, both the trip that they had and what I'll call the afterglow of using psychedelics routinely, were a way to solidify those political relationships. So that's just the most you'll see in text in this entire thing, gives you some sense about where we're going in this talk. So first of all, Wari. So for those of you perhaps have been to Peru or Bolivia, but the sort of purple there, that's the extent of the Inca Empire. And then in pink is Wari. So it's pretty much where you see where contemporary Peru is today. It's a fairly large expanse, so certainly quite smaller than the Incas, and it's about 500 years before the Incas. The Incas are around 1500. The Wari end by about 1000. We could have a whole conversation about what Wari was and thinking about how states are organized. But I think, but for our purposes today, the issue is that there does seem to have been an idea of expansion. Some of that was military. You see here a series of soldiers that are on balsa rafts, like an army moving forth. We have other examples of depictions of Wari folks fighting. And so as Wari expands, there's lots of violence. There's also at the same time in general, and this is just one example from another site. All these little dots are showing you all the head trauma that's happening across the skeletal collections that they're finding. And so you get 30-40% of the skeletal remains have this skeletal trauma to the head. And so not only are you having violence that's happening by Wari folks as they expand, but also a lot of violence and upheaval in the wake of that, right? Because you can imagine that they're unsettling all sorts of different societies as they move forward. And then also what happens here, this is a Requai vessel from Northern Highlands here, is that people begin to recalibrate who they are and what their relationship should be. Okay, so all I'm trying to say here is that you have an expansive polity, wherever it may be in the world, it makes waves. And then in the aftermath, you've got to try to settle things down and make a polity that works, right? So here, what I'm going to suggest is solution, or at least part of the solution that Wari came up with. You can see here's the beautiful Wari vessel here, and this extension of a cup, right? And drinking and hospitality and reciprocity are so important for the Wari and for other folks in the Andes for a long time. And what's important here is this is a map. If you go into the great cities of in the Wari heartland, you'll see it's just almost like a warren of different buildings. And what folks have looked at and said, okay, they begin to establish that there are different houses that are connected here. They seem to be based, and this is based on some of the bioarchaeological evidence, based on lineages. oftentimes matrilines. So you have houses that are sort of extended kin houses, and they're all kind of relate. They all kind of cluster around these larger. Sometimes they're called palaces. With you see it says interior patios there. These bigger complexes with these big patios inside. And if you go into those big patios and you see other places are these D-shaped temples, you'll see them sprinkled across this map. This is another, so this is an example of a city inside of the Wari Heartland, another example right here. Um, you'll see lots of remains for feasts. And if we dig into these patios, for example, we'll not see just one final remain. We'll see layer after layer, floor after floor, and each one of these are associated oftentimes with feasting remains. Okay, so this is fairly common. You're certainly getting it up here as well as in Ontario, is that oftentimes feasting, hospitality are so central to these societies. And so that's what's happening in this heartland. So you have this sense of lineage-based societies. They're all organized around these competing elites that have these, let's call them palaces. And inside those palaces is where they do a lot of the feasting, and they'll do feasting inside some of those temples as well. Um, and if you look at, don't worry about the chart. I'm just sort of saying there's science behind this. But if you look at some of the relationships, for example, in the distribution of say maize kernels or camelid remains, what it looks like is happening is that folks are preparing a lot of the food in their own homes and then bringing it to the palace. So think of it as a potluck dinner. Is that you come, you're invited to the palace. You're going to the patio to feast, and you bring a lot of the food there, right? So you prepare, and then you show up with your sort of food offering for the big event. And this happens again and again and again. And the point here is that this is how Wari politics kind of works. So if someone like Chris, for example, wants to build political power, what he needs to do is host feasts and have people come and build those relationships. And then they have those parties in those smaller spaces, and you're doing a lot of whining and dining, right? So it's small scale politics. It's building these relationships, these political relationships through those routine activities. Okay, and in those same spaces, so inside that palace, and like I said, palace, it's a big house. I mean, we call it palace an elite home, but it's also a place for feasting. It's also a place where ancestors are buried. So you often have these mortuary complexes. They have holes. You'll see the picture above in the middle. You'll see a little hole where, for example, liquid offerings can be poured. And you'll see in some of these cases, you'll see generations of people put into these places. So not everyone is born here, buried here, just these sort of high ancestors. And then a lot of the feasts seem to be organized around celebrating these ancestors at different moments of the year. Okay. So this, and what's also interesting here is you have something, I'll call them ancestor pots. But what it seems like is that some of the key figures, some of the important Wari sort of leaders through time are memorialized in ancestor pots, right? But what's critical for these is that these are the pots in which beer is going to be served at these events, right? So imagine once again is that Chris is having this event, is that Chris is hosting this, but in essence, his ancestors are also hosting this because they are imbibing that beer, if you will, and then it's being given back to all the guests, right? So it's not only just you as a living person that's having this feast, but also all these ancestors are also gathered. And then what we've been able to do, we as in the general community, this is Pat Knobloch's work, but have identified different, she calls them agents, but different individuals that are sometimes Wari, sometimes are enemies of Wari, that are depicted routinely in these pots across all of Peru, right? So there's these sort of very important individuals that are shown and repeated, and their stories are told across pots as well as they interact. Sometimes you'll see, for example, depictions of a few of these folks interacting with each other in different ways, and we can go into those details if you'd like. So here's a reconstruction of a Wari event at one of the big sites called Piquillacta in the Wari Empire. And what's important for us is I mean, one, look in the back. I just put that sort of square there. It's a little confusing because I think it looks a little like it's in the picture. But put that square there. See what you have is you have those big Those are huge vessels, right? They're a meter and a half to up to 2 meters tall. And those, and you see that one person pouring out the beer from there. And then in the foreground, you have two people sharing a glass, right? So this, and they're in all in their finery with their tunics and their four-cornered hats, et cetera, et cetera. This is how politics works once again. It's about feasting. It's about sometimes I used to call it commensal politics, right? Getting in there, whining and dining and doing the work, and that beer is a central part of that, and sharing beer is a central part of that. We see that with the Incas much later, but it seems to be happening with the Wari as well. Okay, so here's this, and this is what I'm telling Chris. I said, yeah, I didn't make this. I just pulled this off the internet. It's kind of a little bit, perhaps off base here, but I'm going to say, but what I want to do is really emphasize that this beer is different than the beer that came before and the beer that came after. It seems, as far as we know, for the most part, at least in terms of its regular use. And so I'm going to call that, for maybe a bit tongue in cheek here, but the secret sauce. So the difference in terms of the feasting that made Wari feasting distinct. Okay. And so once again, feasting, if you know anything about the Andes, they did a lot of drinking, right? So the dead drank, the living drank. That drinking, especially among the Incas, is when the Spanish first came, they were appalled because people would drink until they could not stand up. Just incredible amount of drink. And the whole idea, and once again, we can go into this more, is that you want to circulate the sort of cosmic forces. And in order to do that, you need to continue to to drink and to urinate and to move those fluids back and forth, so that everyone that participated in this felt it was their civic duty, to drink as much as they could in order to make things work in the way they should. Okay, so feasting is important, drinking is important for a long time. Um, but when you look at if you look at Wari sherds, and this is an awful picture here to the left, but it's interesting because they seem to show, in a fair number of them, this motif that looks a whole lot like this Anadenanthera tree. Okay, Anadenanthera we'll get to in a second is a psychedelic plant, but you have these depictions that are occurring on Wari pottery. Got a better example here. You see, once again, this is a motif on a vessel from some colleagues that are working in the Wari heartland. But look on the sides there. You have this sort of deity mask, and we can talk about what that may represent. But see how it sort of have branches, and on the ends there's those what look like seed pods, right? And those are likely those vilca seed pods. And vilca is the Anadenanthera. It's called vilca in the Andes, so we sort of say vilca because Anadenanthera is a lot to deal with. Um, and this use of Anadenanthera is continues. This is it's an image of Yanomami shaman above. That's a Paracas textile. Sorry, below is the Yanomami shaman, and above is a Paracas textile. You can almost see the same sort of thing in that this shaman is sort of in flight. They're going somewhere, right? Different. They're not there anymore. The same thing with the Paracas shaman. And what I'm trying to get at here, and what you've probably seen if you know anything about sort of use of snuff for example, in the jungle today, is it hits you hard, it takes you to a different place, and it lasts a few minutes, right? So typically, you take psychedelics through your nose or through your anus if you're going to take an enema. Those hit you very, very hard and very fast. And the whole idea is to be like that picture above here. This is kind of a person floating in space because they've left themselves and they've left Earth to go somewhere. So that typically when we think of the use of this Anadenanthera and the other kinds of psychedelics, they're used as snuff and they've got a real punch, a real jolt. And this is what was common right before the Wari era. Um, but what we found is we've now found seeds of those Anadenanthera plants. So we have strong evidence not only from the depictions on the ceramics, but now we actually find the seeds, and they're in context and feasting context with excuse me, thousands of these moye drupes. And these are it's called the California pepper tree. They're just little tiny berries that have a hard kernel inside. And what happens is you can make beer out of these things um, fairly easily because you could just get those sugars to unbind and create a really sort of powerful beer that's about 7-8%. And here's a picture of these Moye trees. If you've seen them, folks, they've gone maybe to California, you can see them there, but there are many places in Peru as well. Okay, so what I'm arguing here is that you have this tradition of using this vilca, this Anadenanthera, and there's an example of what the seed looks like right there on the left of your screen. And you combine that with an existing drinking tradition. Okay, this is Martin Chamby's work from the early 20th century, but you get the sense, right? Is that you have these two traditions that are kind of independent. Drinking and the socializing that occurs with that, we see a lot of that. And then this independent use of snuff tablets where people sort of leave the earth. And what I want to suggest here for this group is that if you typically what happens is if you just take if you added that vilca seed and you put it in water, nothing would happen because what happens is the gut is going to deanimate everything. Basically, the enzymes in the gut are going to destroy it. But if you put it with a fermented beverage and with the moye that has inhibitors for those enzymes, something I mean I hate to use the term, but something magical happens, right? And what I want to suggest then is that vilca becomes this sort of party drug. And what I mean by that is this. That instead of having that jolt, what happens is now you drink it. The what happens is your gut takes the edge off that and extends the high. So instead of it being a huge jolt where you're out of your mind, out of your body for say 10 minutes, now you have a smoother or lesser high that lasts for hours. Because as some folks might know, is that oftentimes drugs have very different properties. And what Wari seems to have done is decided, okay, we're not going to make this as a drug that takes certain people out and takes them to a different place. We're gonna bring people together in a larger group, and we're going to use this in different ways. Okay, and so what they seem to have done. Let's see where we are here. Okay. What they seem to have done here is that instead of simply just having regular beer at their events, they would often have this beer with a psychedelic, right? So it's a property that people would not have been familiar with, but would have added a special jolt to those experiences, right? So you can just sort of imagine a mild psychedelic combined with an alcohol high that is occurring throughout an experience, right? Okay, now to finally get to Afterglow, um, what we're also seeing, the increasing work right now on, especially on ayahuasca, is showing that um, your mind is not only altered during the what's called the trip, right? During those 5 minutes or during the 3 hours or 10 hours, however long your experience or psychedelic experience might be, but it remains altered for a long time. Um, could that right now they're looking at 3 months 6 months, even a year, people are looking at. And what happens is it's not exactly, we could talk about details of this, but people talk about rewiring. Basically, what happens is that your neurons get more and more connections. They begin to grow more and more connections with each other. There's more connectivity across the brain. And this lingers long after the experience is over. But what's important for us is that there's been a number of studies now that are showing pro-social feelings. So basically, what I mean by that is increased empathy, increased openness, um, lessened anxiety. So there's a lot of notions here that people that have taken these, and this is even when they microdose or even when they do something where we don't have a trip at all. You have some bespoke compounds that can do the same thing to your brain without causing the trip. You still have these same kinds of pro-social characteristics. Okay. All right. Oops. And here, sorry, here are the enduring pro-social feelings that I'm talking about. This is an example from an ayahuasca retreat. So it's not simply at that moment. And you'll see that once again. I'm not, if you know anyone or perhaps you've taken ayahuasca, um, every time I've talked to people about it, it's always there's a feeling of being open and aware, and it lasts much longer than the trip itself. And so we're trying to sort of understand what that might mean in a context where a large number of people took these. Okay, so let me try to sort of put this all together for you um, succinctly. So vilca then beer as a political tool. So this psychedelic beer as a political tool. Um, so once again, you are, let's say each one of you is an elite and you want to have a feast because once again, those feasts are what enables you to gain and maintain political power. You have what it looks like, and we have good evidence for this, is that people are communally preparing the beer. So each household that's invited to the feast is going to make their own batch of Moye beer. Okay, so each of us then is going to make this Moye beer. We're going to go ahead and we'll stick with Chris as the great elite here. We're all going to make our Moye beer and bring it to the party. Okay, you have all had Moye beer every day your entire life. You know what it tastes like. It's oftentimes in the Andes, like other places, it's a daily thing that you drink. Oftentimes it's safer than water, right? Because of the fermentation kills the microbes, etc. So you have the Moye in the boiling if you boil it especially. Um, but what happens is that when it's brought and Chris accepts all these gifts of beer, says thank you, then goes in the back room. And this is a beautiful object we have from a Wari site. It's like a grinding stone for, like a mortar and pestle. And it's been shattered in four pieces. And something like this, you can imagine right now that Chris gets those seeds of Anadenanthera and adds those to the moye, right? And then puts it into one of those big pots, those ancestor pots, right? And now, fast forward, we're all showing up. We've all now come in. Chris has gone in the back room and added the secret sauce to these things. We've all had Moye beer. We've had nothing like this, right? Suddenly, this is a special beer. And look where it comes from. It comes from those ancestors, right? Chris has put it in there. Those ancestors doing the work, right? Those ancestors that are important, that are powerful. Suddenly, they're providing this special beer in this charged event, and we all go together on a shared trip. Think about a rave, whatever it might be. We're doing, you know, Burning Man again and again and again with these groups, right? But you have shown up with regular beer. Chris has made it into this special, incredible beer, right? And then he is leading us on this incredible journey. And then a few months later, he does it again. He does it again. He does it again. And I say act of transubstantiation, right? It's almost think about the Eucharist and the wine, et cetera, if you're a Catholic. There might be an element of that. It's kind of a little miracle. So that's what I'm suggesting is that they do a little miracle. And we have, of course, we've all had an incredible time, right? Chris has filled our bellies. We've drank a lot. We've ate a lot. We've had a lot of fun. Um, and we had this very special experience. The memories are incredible. But my point is with this afterglow, doesn't matter what the memories are. You have more pro-social feelings. So once again, think about this again as who's coming to the party. Um, that let me see where we are here. Oops, yeah. Let me get my positive. This other thing. I just pulled this off, Chris. Positive mind, positive vibes, positive life. Right? Is that this is your sort of endearing this sort of moment of positivity and pro-sociality. And it's weird because you don't know where this came from necessarily, but we're seeing time and time again across studies that this is the impact, is that people are, once again, pro-social, very open, empathetic. Their anxieties are down. They're ready, to be maybe a bit flippant. They're ready to make friends. All right, but put that once again within the track of a. These are just different Maury sites of an expanding polity where you're trying to make people that were once enemies, people that did not know each other, people that were ambivalent at best with each other, into folks that you can have a relationship with. And so my point here is that feasting was important. A shared ideology was important. There's lots of different elements here that we can say about how do you build a broad society. But my point is that this seems to have been really supported by the use of these psychedelic beverages, uh, the particular context, the way in which they're served, and how it was once again kind of, for lack of a better word, sort of a party drug, but that it has this afterglow, right? So that you come back from that with good feelings, openness, and especially good feelings about those people that you broke bread with, that you shared that time with, right? And what you see in Wari, you only have a couple of slides here to go, is that you're seeing this take place not just in the heartland, but in every site that you go to. They're doing the same thing. They're making those new relationships, right? They're building those communities. They're building those communities one feast at a time, and creating using that special sauce to create that afterglow, to create those sort of, like I said, those vibes that make it possible for that make it much easier, at least in my opinion, for Wari to sort of build those political relationships that are necessary for their continued relationships with those communities. So conclusions here. We can certainly have, this is a beautiful cave in Argentina, but people have been using psychedelics for thousands of years, right? We can certainly look at, there's some great evidence from as early now as about 20,000 years ago. We've evidence for psychedelics and things like hair. So it's ubiquitous across many different cultures. It's central to many different cultures. Um, and that is, and I'm not going to go into the details here, and as you go to different places, there you have the black drink and cahokia, is that they may not be psychedelics. It could be wine, it could be beer, it could be caffeine. But these altered states seem to be extremely important in many societies, and especially as you get a greater complexity and greater and larger and more complex groups, the need to sort of find a social glue and that how psychedelic or altered states are oftentimes very important to creating that glue. So that seems to be across cultural. And so my point here is just that understanding these altered states, understanding how they're used in politics and economics, et cetera, are extremely important. We can't understand these societies without understanding that angle. And so what I provided here is an example. Here's just a Wari vessel that you can understand Wari without thinking about feasting, without thinking about vilca and the psychedelics. And as Jacob and I try to argue in this article, without thinking about that afterglow, about the chemical impacts that psychedelics have on all brains, and how that could potentially be used in governance, when instead of just having a privileged few taking psychedelics, which is fairly common in many societies, if you're having many people take these drugs, what happens? And so this is sort of a thought experiment about that. And I think I have a thank you with your symbol here from Facebook. So thank you always, Graham River, for the opportunity. And like I said, I went fairly quickly here, but I wanted to leave lots of time for conversation if we do have some questions. So thank you.